Hey everybody, welcome to Dad's Den Pop Culture. Today I'm looking at Droids, the Star Wars cartoon from 1985. Came out a little bit after Star Wars had begun to sort of fade from the kid world. Obviously, Return of the Jedi was, 83? It's a couple years afterwards. And a lot of us have sort of moved on to other things, G.I. Joe, Transformers, what have you. You know, kids were inconsistent at best. And so it's a cartoon that I never really saw back in the day. I would have been 13 or so when it came out. I do remember seeing it show up with Ewoks on TV and kind of thinking, whoa, Star Wars? That's kind of weird. Like, I thought Star Wars was over. Well, Star Wars wasn't over. And this is actually, if you get down to it, kind of the first of the prequels for the original Star Wars trilogy. So it is set before Star Wars, and it basically follows C-3PO and R2-D2 on their adventures before they wound up on Tatooine and, you know, in the ownership of Luke Skywalker. It's not a perfect cartoon by any means, but well, let's go through it and take a look, and you'll see it does have some value to it for sure. So let's start off with one of my criticisms of the cartoon, and that is the opening theme. It's done by Stuart Copeland from The Police. And it sort of strikes me about the same way that opening theme song for Star Trek Enterprise did. There's nothing wrong with it in and of itself. Doesn't feel right for Star Wars. There's a particular sound we associate with Star Wars. And that ain't it. And you know, it's kind of the same way with Star Trek. We want something a little bit of a fanfare, what have you. I know some people dug it, but I can remember when I was watching the series on streaming, that was an easy skip for me. And so the music doesn't really work too well with the subject matter in that regard, but the music during the cartoon, during the series, the background music, also a bit of a problem. The animation in the series is decent. It gets the job done, but it's never really brilliant. Doesn't have those moments that you're going to remember forever. It portrays the story. It gets things done. Good enough. Every once in a while, it's a little bit wonky. It was done by Nelvana. Now, they're the same folks who did the very famous cartoon portion of the Star Wars Holiday Special that kind of really introduced Boba Fett to everybody. So it's not bad, but it's not brilliant. It's sort of, it's kind of a casualty of its age, because at the same time that the anime was figuring out, well, essentially taking lessons learned. I assume they learned them. They may have just figured it out on their own as well, but lessons learned from like 1930s, 40s Looney Tunes of taking an image and sort of smearing it to create the illusion of fast movement or very fluid movement in a cartoon. These were still working off of the no, just draw every picture in between here and there. And it doesn't always give you the best movement. And for a cartoon that is something of an action cartoon, that can definitely be a problem. The design elements, though, in the cartoon are really pretty darn good. Everything in it, to me at least, felt Star Wars. It seemed right to me. So that I rather liked. You do get some new designs of vehicles. A lot of them, though, really harken back to original Star Wars designs. Now, obviously, George Lucas had something to do with this, and I'm sure that he kind of, kept some, maybe not a close rein, but a somewhat close rein on what they were doing to make sure things more or less had the right feel. stars the voices of Anthony Daniels as C-3PO. And of course, he's brilliant. He does a great job with the character. Now, this is an animated cartoon, not live action. So you get movement out of C-3PO and R2-D2 that you could have never gotten in live action. Absolutely could never have gotten in live action. And so this is sort of reflected in how the voice work is done as well. It's definitely C-3PO, but it's a little different. The whole thing's a little more fast-moving, action-driven than, we got with those two characters in the movies. But I like that he adapts his voice to make it work in the cartoon. R2-D2 does himself. In fact, it was Ben Burt, who was the sound guy, sound designer for Star Wars. He steps in and he does the R2-D2, and of course, sounds perfect. So if you're in love with those two characters, you're going to dig what they do in this cartoon. It sounds right. It doesn't sound off at all. Based on characters by George Lucas, obviously. So in terms of voices, though, we'll stick with that for a little bit. A lot of Canadian voice actors in this. A lot of voices you might recognize if you watch enough cartoons. We'll call out particularly Don Francks, who does Boba Fett, and he'll later do one of the better villains in the series. Cree Summers. I think this is maybe even one of the earlier things that she had done. You get a lot of Canadian voice actors. They do a fine job. Maybe, though, a little bit low energy. And I think that is the biggest problem with Droids. It's kind of an action comedy. Maybe just a little bit of, well, if not drama, then, heartfelt stuff in it. But it's mostly an action comedy. And sometimes the energy level is a little low in terms of the voice acting, especially in terms of the music. The music is mostly done like on a keyboard synthesizer thing. And it's super underwhelming. Now, I wouldn't say that it ruins the cartoon, but it doesn't add anything to the cartoon. And you do want to keep a high energy for a cartoon like this. It's about all these misadventures of the droids and all the problems they get into. So that, to me, if there's a really single huge complaint that I had with Droids, it's that somewhat lack of energy. That could also make it a little hard to introduce to modern day kids. So I think otherwise, and again, if we're talking, in maybe the 6 to 10 year range, would probably dig the cartoon, especially if they enjoy Star Wars in general. But the lack of energy mixed with shorter attention spans could be a problem in that regard. And so back to the voices one more time. When I was talking about Don Francks, really good portrayal of a character called Kybo Ren. No relation, I guess, to Kylo Ren. Was that his name? What I dug was that the voice reminded me quite a bit of his portrayal of Mock from Rock and Rule, which is one of my favorite cartoons from back in the day. If you've never seen it, you just want to check that one out. But so he does a great job in that. And Winston Reckert does a character called Mungo Baobab, who is easily the best non-droid protagonist in the series. He kind of shows up at the end. So we'll talk more about them later. But I think those outside of C-3PO, out of, say, Anthony Daniels and Ben Burt, I think those are the two better performances over the course of the series. The series is split into 3 storylines, each like about 4 episodes long. So you get 13 episodes entirely. Now, one episode is sort of a special, which seems like it really should be placed before the third storyline based on some of the dialogue. So kind of an interesting way to do it. So we basically see the droids, they have their first little adventure with a group, and then are kind of abandoned. Well, they kind of abandon themselves, hook up with the next group, hook up. So it's, it introduces new characters and new storylines as you go along. It's kind of, I think, a smart way to do it, but it doesn't just, it's not purely episodic. You do get continuation in the thing. So the very first storyline starts with the White Witch. Now, what this one is about is our droids hook up with these like speeder bike racers, and they're trying to get to another planet that has these races on it. So, okay, that's something I think we can all agree is definitely Star Warsy. And again, one of the nice things about this cartoon is that it shows life outside of the Skywalker saga that we got from the original trilogy. And I know some people have said, well, they need to do more of that with the Star Wars they're making nowadays, kind of like they did with that Andor TV series. Well, that's exactly what they do here, and they do a fairly good job of it. So it begins with 3PO and R2 have kind of crash landed on this sort of a desert planet. They were dumped there by a smuggler who they were working for. And this one has like corrosive salts instead of sand. And initially 3PO cannot find R2, and he's, R2 has been killed. Oh, R2 was such this marvel of modern technology. He was a wonderful, droid, yada, yada, yada. And then he pops up out of the sands. And of course, 3PO is, I take all of that back. You're a stupid pain in the butt, blah, 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 blah. So it instantly gives us the 3PO R2 relationship that we got from the movies. So it's very familiar to us. We're going to stick with that. And they do a great job of portraying that. And so they're found by these racers, Thal Jobin and Jord Dusat. Fun names to try to remember. And the introduction to them is reminiscent to how Luke discovers them on Tatooine. So again, good way to fold kids into the series if they've seen the original trilogy, they've seen those original movies. And at this point, in 85, most of the kids who would have seen them probably would have seen the movies on a VHS tape rather than in the theaters. I mean, not including like Return of the Jedi. But it's good. It gets the kids into something familiar, and then it's going to go in another direction. The primary bad guys in this one are mobsters, gangsters. So kind of like Jabba the Hutt. And he does get name dropped at a certain point. And so the main guy is the one sitting there is called Tig. I think it's Frome. Tig Frome, who is trying to modernize his father's gangster operation with technology. And he's come up with this grand plan that's going to let them conquer all sorts of territory and, really be big time. And that's like his dad's assistant bodyguard who has no respect for the kid whatsoever. And you kind of get why his father doesn't have a lot of respect for him either as the series goes on. So they're kind of spying on these kids and what they're doing. And this in turn puts the kids into contact with Kia Mall, who is part of the Rebel Alliance. And she's a girl. Oh my goodness. You mean they had girls in Star Wars back then? Yes, they did. And I like the design, very reminiscent. We go back a little bit, very reminiscent of the look of Princess Leia in Return of the Jedi when she was disguised as the bounty hunter. So again, it doesn't feel like key jangling. It feels like we're trying to bring you into this universe in its particular style and give kids something somewhat familiar with to get them into it, hook them, and then they're going to see some interesting new things as they go along. And so you get that that look, that feel of the Star Wars universe, things being a little bit lived in and run down. This is sort of the desert town, a little bit like Mos Eisley, that you get on this first planet. Here we see like an Imperial shuttle. So again, I think the design work goes really well in this cartoon, and gives you the proper feel. And we also do get some cameos. In the 4th episode, we get Boba Fett. But what's nice is they don't overdo the cameos. Fett shows up working with the gangsters. He owes something. He's not really happy about it, but he's there. We're also going to get IG-88. We're going to get Jabba the Hutt's going to get name dropped. The Emperor's going to get name dropped when Imperials get involved. But that's really about it. It lets you know you're in the Star Wars universe, but you're not. It's mostly about new characters and new storylines and not rehashing the old stuff, which I guess at the point of this is that's all in the future, but still, you get the idea. There are no Jedis in Droids. The Jedis don't show up. This is sort of the other side, the normal people outside of the, I guess you could call them the elite when you get right down to it. These are more common people, traders and smugglers and folks running little shops, etc. And so I really dig that about the thing. It does a good job of broadening the Star Wars universe, again, in a very kid-friendly way. So at the end of the first storyline, the races are run, and our two heroes, they manage to, foil the bad guys, and they get these job offers, but they're going to have to leave the droids behind. And they're like, no, man, 3PO and R2 are our friends. We don't want to do that. So 3PO and R2 get into an escape hatch thing on their ship and blast off themselves so that those guys can go on to live on their dreams and do what they want to do. So it's a nice little thing about friendship and sacrifice. And this lands them in the next story, which is they end up on this sort of backwards, crappy planet, working in a diner initially. It's the only job they could find, and they're not really very good at it. And the overall storyline is going to have something to do with more gangsters, and a really, frankly, scary looking gangster at that. And I think, again, from a design standpoint, again, it works with Star Wars, but it's also reminiscent of some of the other stuff Nelvana has done, like in Rock and Rule. And they end up finding this person, and it turns out that he's actually a prince. And the master of the droids in this one is Jan. Jan Tosh. I'm reading my little script down here, and I don't have my bifocals today. If you notice me looking down every once in a while, that's what I'm doing, because I aim for a level of professionalism that is just above zero, but not very much above zero. At any rate, so he's this miner that they hook up with, and he is going to try to help this guy, get back to his home world where his throne has been usurped by a bad guy. And this brings him into contact with Jessica Meade, finally a name that's easy to pronounce and understand. And she's kind of like a Han Solo type. She's a pilot. She has her own ship. She's pretty cool and all that kind of stuff. And good characters. And again, good lessons through the cartoon as well. And this storyline, ultimately, they're going to be going up against not just an usurper, but also these pirates who, are causing all sorts of trouble. And this storyline goes in a couple different directions. This is where we do get the IG-88 cameo. And again, it's a cameo. It doesn't feel like key jangling. I mean, keep in mind, this cartoon was meant for kids who still had a youthful love of Star Wars. It was not intended, or I'll put it this way. The Gen X that nowadays are looking at some of the modern Star Wars and going, I don't know about this. We were teenagers at this point, so we probably weren't even looking at it at all. So it wasn't a nostalgia thing at that point, but it probably was a little bit about selling action figures, which they were still doing. And I dig at the end of the storyline, R2 and C-3PO get medals after them and Chewbacca were basically screwed out of them at the end of Star Wars. That still bugs me. How did Chewbacca not get a freaking medal? Come on, Leia. It's nonsense. But at the end of this one, we get into the next storyline, which is where they hook up with Mungo Baobab, who I think was the best, and at least the most exciting of the protagonists in this one. And he's on this quest he's a trader, and he's on this quest to get valuable rune stones, ROON stones, not like the things the Vikings used, that are found on some world within the Cloud of Sith, which is a pretty cool name drop when you get down to it. We get stormtroopers in this one as they bust in looking for the guy, which makes more sense if you've seen the special, because it should probably be before this storyline. I love that shot, and I love the design of the stormtroopers in this series. We also get R2-D2 breakdancing, which if Snake Eyes from G.I. Joe can do it, then I don't see why R2-D2 can't. And the chief villain in this series is going to be Admiral Screed. And I think he's the best villain for the whole series. You see his kind of modified Star Destroyer. It's, I don't know, looks like it's a lot smaller than most of the Star Destroyers. So it's maybe some kind of special ship. And you can see Screed looks like he's had some of the cybernetic work done, kind of like you get from Darth Vader. Very cool villain, very smart. So we get a lot of stormtroopers, and we get a lot of the Imperials and stuff in this. So this is where we get the Emperor gets name dropped and all that. And I kind of dig that, I'm betting this is because it was a kid's cartoon. The stormtroopers do not have their blasters. They have these spears that shoot lasers. What's the difference? Well, they don't look like guns, and that was an issue even back then with a lot of moms groups. So our stormtroopers have this, and you'll see you really don't get guns and blasters through the whole series. It doesn't ruin it, though, honestly, because of the kind of stories they're telling. If they were heavily into the Rebel Alliance and all that, you'd kind of expect something like that, but they don't go too far with it here. But it is a cool looking weapon, though. I'll say that. Somebody probably 3D prints these things. You could put them in the hands of your old Stormtrooper action figures, I would bet. Because the cartoons are meant for children, you don't get really deep, intricate plot lines or very adult storylines, which is fine. The good guys are good guys. The bad guys are bad guys. The bad guys usually kind of cause their own downfall by their badness. You get a lot of virtues of friendship and loyalty and courage. So it's really great in that regard. I also like the fact that they're not trying to do anything radical with the Star Wars universe. It was still new and it was still fresh for the most part, even in 85. But they don't do anything to screw up the lore or break it. It all feels very much like it should be part of the Star Wars universe. Aside from the fact that it's animated, so you got, again, 3PO and R2 moving around like they couldn't have done when it's, Daniel's in the costume and all that. But other than that, it really does feel like it belongs in Star Wars. And you do get some cool designs of their own showing up here and there. That again, I think they blend relatively well with the overall cartoon. I will say again, though, the music is the big sticking point for me for most of the episodes. It's like electric synthesizer keyboard thing, and it's kind of stuff. And it does the episodes absolutely no favors. Now, in the special, they port in music that is taken from the original trilogy. And it's funny, I was listening to these as much as watching them. And I'm watching that special, and I'm like going, this one feels the most Star Warsy to me in some ways. And it finally hit me. I'm like, music. It feels the most Star Warsy because it has Star Wars music in it. but you get all the great trappings that you would expect from Star Wars. I don't think I would have enjoyed this that much at 13. I think I would have been bored with it. I was transitioning away from Star Wars and into, more manly pursuits like, I don't know, the Transformers or G.I. Joe. And, well, obviously girls. But I think in the 8 to 10 range, for sure, I think kids would still enjoy it. And I think I would have enjoyed it at that age as well. The series did get a game on the Commodore 64. How cool is that? And if you really look, you could tell this is one of the cassette tapes. Yeah, the Commodore 64 VIC-20 had an attachable cassette player that you could use to feed data into the machines. And that's what that is. Those have got to be probably a little bit valuable at this point. But you get a lot of lessons in this cartoon. Like I said, a lot of virtues. And I think it's really good for kids, who have an enjoyment of Star Wars. It's something you could trust for them to watch. They're not going to get any, screwed up ideas watching Droids. Adult Star Wars fans might enjoy it just for the fact that, and let's be honest, the Star Wars fanatics have probably already watched it. But if you haven't for some reason, you might enjoy it for the nostalgia. The stories are not bad. They're just a little slow paced and they're a little bit aimed towards children. But it's enjoyable, and you get a little bit of a Star Wars fix off of it. I would say overall, I would grade the series a C+. It's a little above average. I think had you used Star Wars music throughout the entire thing, I'd bring it up to a B- for sure. And that's from an adult standpoint. For a kid, it's probably already like a grade B. It's just going to be a matter of getting over those short attention spans nowadays. But if you got a kid who's really in love with Star Wars, they'd probably dig the Droids cartoon. I believe it's playing on Disney Plus. I found it somewhere else. So you could find it out there. Yeah, throw it on, give it a chance. I think you might enjoy it. It's a well-made cartoon for the most part. It just has a few little flaws in terms of energy. So let me know in the comments what you think of Droids. Something you love, something you, thought was kind of, could have been a lot better. Just let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this review, please like, subscribe, share with a friend. Until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. And I'll see you again, hopefully soon, in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.